Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mary Ann Hensley. I'm the Vice President of Media Operations for FreightWaves, and we are happy to present today's webinar in partnership with Redwood Logistics. I'm excited to be here today as we discuss the findings of our latest research conducted in partnership with Redwood, which focuses on how shippers have been weathering the volatility of the past 2 years, as well as the role that technology and digitization can play in that process. I'm joined today by Kevin Hill, Head of Research here at FreightWaves, to talk through the findings of the study, as well as Adam Moreau, Executive Vice President of Sales for Redwood, who will be sharing his thoughts around what the Redwood team has seen in this area and some strategies for success. Before we get started, just a couple of quick items. If you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to our team via the group or audience chat function in your webinar console. And we will be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow in case you'd like to view it on demand or share it with your colleagues. And at this point, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin to kick off today's discussion.
Thank you, Mary Ann, and thank you, Adam, for joining us today, and thank all the viewers out there taking time out of their busy schedules to talk about weather and volatility. I think it's something that is on everyone's mind. Not only the volatility in the market, but also how it's driving technology and innovation, and I think we see that across all industries. Everyone is changing and adapting to meet these volatile times. I think technology has been insanely productive over the last couple of years, and oftentimes companies, a lot of companies and industries, and really the entire economy, oftentimes they don't want to be the first one out there trying something new unless they're forced to. And I think we're all forced to really grab different solutions and test that out and see what worked. So with that, this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about technology trends, innovation trends in transportation and logistics, and also market volatility, when that might ease, what the expectations are, what kind of market are we navigating through. So to kick off, we did a survey of shippers with Redwood, really gauging these key questions, right? Technology, innovation, and also what the market's doing, what the expectations are, and kind of plans for how to adapt to this. So our key survey findings that we had, shippers said that their number one issue was unpredictable capacity. And I think, Adam, you'd agree with that. I think everyone out here listening to us and viewing the slide deck right now would agree with that as well.
Yeah, and Kevin, thanks for having me on. Happy to talk through this stuff with you guys. And yeah, I mean, no matter what you call it, unpredictable capacity or, unreliable rates, just where we're going as an industry over the next, several months and year. Yeah, that volatility is really what we're trying to solve for, right? And how we're doing it with digitization. Again, just what direction the industry is really going, what new solutions are out there that are really solving for the challenge of creating a less volatile experience, for the next cycle. And that's really what I think we're going to be excited to talk about today.
It is, yeah. And 80% of our respondents said that their transportation spend increased significantly over the last couple of years. And that leads into that volatility in that unpredictable capacity. We'll talk about predictability and unpredictability quite a bit as we move along the slides here. Other key survey findings were, transportation has just gotten expensive. It's gotten expensive, do a 3-year comp, a 2-year comp, a 1-year comp, and we're seeing quite a spike in transportation costs. That 3-year comp has grown for about 40% of shippers, between 26 and 50% on the rate side. We talk about digitization, how that leads to more predictable capacity, more predictable rates, more predictable business processes, and also key criteria that shippers often look for in supply chain partners, and a lot of that is high service levels and on-time delivery. And whenever you have unpredictable capacity, those are definitely important. So a little bit about that survey, about the audience size. On the sector or industry, a lot of CPG and retail companies, general manufacturing, spread it about evenly through that, and then about a quarter of the respondents selected other as their industry vertical. And about 40% were smaller shippers, SMBs, between $1 million, $20 million in transportation spend, and then kind of evenly spread out. You have 50 million, 100 million, 500 million, and more than 500 million in here. So we had the survey. Those are our demographics. So what are the top challenges for shippers? When we move in, we kind of highlighted it with that first slide that we had. But on a scoring scale of between 1 and 5, what we see is unpredictable capacity and also difficulty forecasting full truckload rates. Those kind of go hand in hand along with resource planning and reducing operating costs. There's a lot of great choices here to talk about and highlight. But I'll ask you, Adam, just right off the bat, which response or which selection really surprised you the most?
Nothing terribly surprising. I think this is part of the narrative that we're all talking about, and really that we're all trying to solve for. I think, 1, 2, and 3 on here. I'll talk about rates and capacity and planning for operating costs, right? Forecasting challenges and that unpredictability and unreliability around capacity and rates. It all sums up to sort of managing through this unprecedented chaos, right? And sort of why so many of us are focused on, I guess, the other side of that, which is consistency, reliability, and making sure, I guess, the next several months, next year, what does the next cycle look like so we don't have these answers next time, right? So the unreliability and unpredictability around what it is that we faced over the last several months and a couple of years, how does that change moving forward? So no, I don't think this is very surprising for any of us. I think what the good news is the digitization of freight brokerage is actually the lowest on this list. It's probably a combination of, not everyone having the experience with it so far, but also so far so good, right? Those that are using it are seeing the benefits and really aren't grouping that in as part of the challenge, but hopefully part of the solution.
It's probably part of exactly part of the solution, part of the opportunity, rather than challenge. So one of the things I probably should have asked you, maybe not the most surprising, but the most interesting. And one of the more interesting ones I have my eye out for the rest of this year is effectively forecasting inventory, managing inventory. I think that's going to be a big headline, depending on what the market does, right? If the market stays hot, there's still going to be challenges with, how much do we buy? And if the market does turn, you are going to be tasked with the overhang of inventories and what to do with that.
Yeah, there's a couple world events going on right now, right, that are making, I think, the predictability of, sales out there a little dicey. And I think we're in for probably a slower couple months. I think that's sort of the consensus of what volumes might look like for a lot of people out there over the next couple of months. But what does that turn into for the summer? The window of predictability right now in the market is becoming a challenge, right? It's definitely becoming a tough one to nail down. But I think for us, managing that inventory forecasting with our clients, for us, it's more about how do we provide enough capacity and sort of the access to that capacity through the digitization of freight brokerage to account for whatever those planning issues are, right, over the next year as we sort of come out of what were, again, very unprecedented times.
So those are very good analysis. Those aren't these are the shipping difficulties. There are more risks and challenges, right? And part of that does come with shipping and freight rates. You see that's the most worrisome on the weighted average. Please score how challenging you expect the following to be for your company in 2022. Freight rates, routing guides up there as well. But you also have labor shortages, manufacturing procurement, raw materials procurement, and it all adds up to inflation. All of these criteria add into inflation, which is very worrisome for the economy, for load volumes, for rates. But you see, it's a pretty, there's a lot of risks out there, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, and really, it's about what we can and can't control. As I guess a provider community and a shipping community. I think the labor shortage, that's impacting all of us, and we're solving for that, right? But it's not necessarily something that we can directly impact necessarily. I think what we're trying to solve for is bringing the challenge of freight rate volatility down, so we can see that route guide compliance come up. Right now, there's a risk but an opportunity. So I think understanding that this is where the risk is solving for that volatility. That's that word that you open with. We're all talking about constantly. How do we take out some of that volatility to really make sure the stability is there in a way that it hasn't been over the last couple of years?
Yeah, and that's technology and innovation, right? It is about making better processes.
Yeah, I mean, how can we attack these issues differently than we have been historically, right? So we've all sort of been offering the same basic, technology, the same basic access, but now we're seeing that tipping point of tech in supply chain. How quickly can we provide access to a wider range of capacity options, right? And how can we share data to, really allow our shipping partners to understand real-time market costs and market rates in a way that they have not seen, that kind of data shared from 3PLs before, right? I think it's been always a little bit protectionist when it comes to data. How can I use the data to, better ourselves? But now I think there is this concept of data share that has been beneficial to the community over the last years. We're sort of all banding together to figure out how can we work together? How can we share these massive troves of data that we're all sitting on to digitize not just the workflow, but again, give us an opportunity to share all of that capacity and rate access to our shipping partners.
And I think if we talk about innovation, that's probably one of the most innovative things we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years is data sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's way beyond EDI, right? So it's more about not just improving a workflow, but even through something like an API connectivity. How can we give that much access instantly, right, to everyone, to anyone who's using it for whether it's project-based knowledge or whether it's actual shipping knowledge? There's so much data that we can learn from, and I think the willingness to share it now is at an all-time high. I think that's just all of us banding together to figure out how can we, again, create a more stable environment and sort of use everything that we all have collectively to create a little more stability.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that adds transparency to the market, makes it more predictable. The more predictable it is on the upswing of volatility, the more predictable and the more you can capitalize on that downswing that always happens. Talking about transportation rate volatility, here we are, and no surprise here, right, Adam? Almost everyone's seeing
no surprise. I think we'll throw out the no impact and the decreased our spends. Maybe somebody pressed the wrong button on that one or misunderstood the question. But I think the increased our spend slightly. That's an interesting group, right? I think that might be a subset of shippers who have maybe gotten out in front of the digitization and maybe partnered with a few of the early adopters where they got ahead of really creating that dedicated capacity network for themselves where they really minimize the damage for their own networks in terms of access to capacity, right? So I can assume that's either a combination of that or other factors of their business that are more stable. But again, no surprise to see the increased our spend significantly that high. I think that's just a factor of what we've all been up against, and that's really the group that we're trying to solve for, right? How can we bring that down significantly into the increased our spend slightly category? And I think that's that's what we're all talking about right now. How do we stabilize that group who's seen year over year and 2 and 3 year over year increases that are just unmanageable, right? And we can't continue that way.
And that's a really good point. I mean, we want to help people out there that go from significant spending increase to slightly, because the market's gone up. There's no way to hide from that, but there is a way to minimize your costs and increase, of course, I'll say it again, your predictability, right? Outcome.
Yeah, that 18-20%. Like what was their strategy, right, compared to others? Did they have more access to dedicated capacity? Probably. Or did they just have quicker access to this capacity, even transactional capacity, just by having the digital tools to sort of beat everyone else to those very valuable and scarce trucks, right, over the last couple of years? So I think there's a combination of that. There's probably, again, a very deep partnership strategy in that subset, but also I'm sure it has a lot to do with that access to freight. Access to capacity through a lot of the digital tools that we're talking about.
Yeah. And this is the backward looking, that's the rear view mirror portion of this. So let's switch gears a little bit and look out the front window, the windshield here. What are the expectations for volatility and comps for 2022? And what we're going to find right here is, how does your projected transportation spend in 2022 compared to 2019? So we're doing a 3-year comp. We're doing a pre-pandemic comp. And what we're seeing is that, it's still, compared to 2019, expectations are for, we're talking about 2/3 of respondents are looking for at least 25% high to 25% and more higher on their transportation spend. And Adam, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a different world, right, than 3 years ago, and I think that's the reality that we're all finding ourselves in. It's just basements are rising as they do over time, and really, I think our focus is on accepting this reality and now focusing on how do we lessen that blow year over year, right? How do we make sure that it's not 51%, but it's a little bit year over year. It's, again, more manageable. What can we do to create better meetings that our shippers are having with their exec teams, right, and their leadership teams, in terms of explaining what they will predict over the next year, and what are they doing about it? Who are they partnering with to help alleviate exactly what you're showing on this graph, right? This is being presented to a lot of CFOs, and the questions are the same. It's what happened, and again, a lot of the responses are, have you seen the news lately, right? Which is a very legitimate response, but at a certain point in time, you need more than that, right? And you need concrete solutions. You need partners that are on the cutting edge of technology, and you have to get creative with how you're going to explain how this is no longer going to happen year over year, right? And I think that's really my take on this, is that we all understand where we got to, right? And here's the 21 versus 2022. This is what we're trying to create, right? A smaller impact year over year than we just are trying to recover from, emotionally and obviously professionally in all of our careers right now in companies. How do we create that more consistent, predictable, and scalable environment moving forward?
Yeah, and I think that the upside volatility is calmed down quite a bit. It'd be tough to have huge comps between 2021 and 2022. And if we do, that'll be quite a story in of itself, right?
Yeah, and we're not expecting that, right? So I think this is exactly what we would predict is, okay, they're going to go up, but really only going up in order to lock in that concept of dedicated capacity, right? I think everyone is just trying to make sure that they have the tools they need to access the dedicated, consistent, and private capacity networks that will allow for more predictable year-over-year increases where it's explainable, right? It's defensible. And again, just the partnerships that you can rely on and sort of, here's who we are partnered with and here's what they are doing differently. And that is how we're going to reduce the volatility year over year, right? So we can expect here's how we're minimizing it. Here's what we're doing digitally, to get more access to the rate data, market data and capacity that we need to make sure it's a little more level year over year.
You definitely do. And that brings us to the next slide here. The next question in the survey is, we asked everyone, how will this freight market turn around? What conditions need to be present for it to happen? Is it happening right now? That's a question that we've been asking at FreightWaves for the last few weeks, and our data shows that there's certainly something happening. So what do we need to have? Our respondents said, really the most, or the favorite answer was the market won't stabilize in 2022. So, yeah, and new capacity being one of the solutions, right? And it's hard to argue with certainly that. that criteria.
Yeah, I liken the new capacity almost to the labor shortage a little bit, right? Especially at least as a 3PL. I think we have to figure out what we can control. And yeah, this is a very interesting response, because I think some people are saying it won't. Others are saying if it does, it's basically out of my control, right? And I think that's the narrative we're trying to flip a little bit year over year right now is, okay, we sort of got out of that environment where, yeah, there wasn't much we could do other than just hold on, and try our best to make sure service levels stayed as high as they could. Of course, we were trying to do everything we could on the digitization side to minimize costs and make sure we were optimizing workflows. But really, I think this is more about how do individual shippers create their own stabilization, right? I think as a market, as an industry, yeah, there will still be challenges this year, and we all know that. But how do each shipper sort of come out of their previous few years identifying what their most challenging issues are? And I think you really do have to look at tech advancements to answer that, right? I mean, again, I keep saying this; these are the themes, but access to capacity, access to data, and market data, that is within your control, right? So I think you can partner with the right individuals, you can partner with the right companies to get your hands on those types of solutions, and that is certainly, again, that's controllable. New capacity, that will come with time, right? As the cycles often materialize in that way, but in the meantime, what can you do differently? And I think the answer again lies in that balance between tech and people. But on the API side, on the data sharing side, I think right now is the time to get a little more creative, a little more open to hearing about what those solutions are. If nothing else, just to again change the narrative for this year, right? Change the conversation within the boardrooms, within the exec rooms. What are the solutions that we need to be talking about that are a little different, right? They're on the cutting edge.
I think that's interesting. As a business, as a shipper, you need to create a stabilization environment, right? So no matter what, you can't control the volatility in the market. You can't control inflation. You can't control labor shortages. You can't control capacity. But what you can do is invest in the tech and innovation, the processes to reduce that volatility for your own business as much as possible. Right?
Yeah. No. Again, it's about taking over the control of the results, but really the conversation, right? It's really about how do we change that narrative. I think that really is a big message that we've sort of taken away from this year in all of our conversations with our shippers. And sort of what they're dealing with. And a lot of it is, okay, I know what you guys are doing. Help me package that conversation into something that we can really take upstairs, right? And make sure that everyone is understanding that this is what we are doing together as partners to answer for some of this volatility. And how can we convince, our leadership teams that we have a plan, right? Again, the plan is much different this year than it was the last couple of years. I said it before. Last couple of years were really how do we navigate through the most unprecedented storm for many reasons that we had all experienced in our careers in this industry, and how do we stabilize that conversation and create some confidence again that we are all sort of working together towards a very manageable and very scalable solution that will help us through whatever the next very volatile experience is in this industry.
You're exactly right. And the key question is how. How are shippers procuring transportation? What technologies they're using? And that is going to be the next section that we talk about. We'll dive down into some specifics here. And right here we have a sliding scale. Please indicate on the sliding scale how much of your process of buying transportation is digitized today. So this is, the percentage of the process, and it looks, I think it was 56.5% was the actual number. The median number is 60% of the process of procuring transportation is technology-based, digitized. Does this surprise you at all?
No. I mean, I would like to see sort of what the breakdown is between how much of that is EDI versus API. Mm-hmm. I think EDI has been around, right? That's obviously the first step in getting quick access to capacity, but I think the smaller subset of that blue bar would be API, and I think that's what's more exciting to us, right? I think that's the concept of workflow automation, but also this massive data share concept that will really drive, I think, everything forward much more quickly, right? That really is what we open the conversation with, right? Is how do we drive such widespread access to capacity for our shippers in ways that are so much quicker and more efficient than we ever had before? And how do we trust the market data and the cost data and remove emotion from that process as much as possible, so we can again create that very consistent experience for the most predictable rate access and the most reliable capacity access. I think API is the solution for that. And again, I would expect if that graph was repeated next year, and it was broken out between EDI and API, I think you'd see a very exponential growth rate for API, while EDI continues to obviously truck along.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The API trend is a hockey stick, right? It's exponential growth in that. Another thing I point out that I think 40% of our survey respondents was about $1 to $20 million worth of transportation spend. So I think if you spread this over transportation spend, you're going to see a much higher digitization in $500 million or more, $100 million worth of transportation spend. But to have this high of a number, you can see that trend with the small SMB shippers out there that are adopting technology and innovation quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, and just a quick comment on that, if the small businesses have the tech capabilities to create an API connection to some of their core partners, I think if we say, okay, the subset of those small businesses, let's say which ones are in growth mode, right? Because API really is a tool to help them through network planning, right? It doesn't just have to be access to capacity. When I say access to rate data, it means you can use that however you choose to better your business, right? If you want to create, again, network planning, growth planning around what are the best shipping lanes, what are the most economical decisions that I can make about my network growth, the answer is in that data, right? And getting, again, real-time access to that is something that I don't think even large shippers have had, really ready access to for more than a couple of years to this degree, right? Now that we're all sharing to this degree, it's not just for big shippers. It is for anyone who's trying to just, again, better themselves and their networks in terms of the knowledge that they're using for their decision making. Or an RFP by chance. Let's say they go through an RFP process, but it takes 3 months to go live. They can use an API tool to double check themselves before they go live to see, especially in these environments, has there been a volatility shift that would make this RFP in jeopardy of even being relevant at this point. So again, just the different ways in which you can use that tool and that access to data. It's a lot of different ways that you can get creative with it, and there's really not a whole lot of reasons not to do it. But again, it's about learning the tool, right? Hearing about it, understanding what it can do for your specific company, and then figuring out how you can take those steps forward to create that connectivity.
It's all about connectivity. It really is.
Yeah.
If we get to the next one, next slide here, next question. If less than 100% digital, what plans do you have to further digitize? And you're seeing about a third have plans for a further mix of digital and traditional. About 12 to 15% says plans for a full digitization, and then no current plans to change the progress. This is how do you take this question and these responses? Adam, what do you think about it? Yeah,
I think this is consistent with the responses we're getting right now, honestly, from the shipping community. I think starting from the left, if I will, I guess plans for full digitization, that doesn't work for everyone, right? So I think there's got to be a specific company with a specific appetite for wanting to do that. And I think if there is a timeline associated with that, it might make more sense. Is that 5 years out? Is that 10 years out? Who knows, right? But I think right now the sweet spot, and again, the responses that we're hearing is how do we succeed in that mix of digital and traditional, right? I think it's how do we really combine the tech advancements and not lose the human touch? And how do we provide the same consistent experience, the same experience that they expect, the shipping community expects from a service perspective, with digitization helping the process but not taking over the process? So how do we continue to enhance our people, not replace them? And that's really what we're hearing in that middle category, right? I think a lot of the no current plans to change the process will transition into the mix of both over the next year and 2 years and certainly 3 years and beyond. I think that's just obviously going to be the natural progression of this chart. If you look at it year over year, I think, an industry that's maybe historically slower at adopting some, cutting edge technology, like we all have been, but we're more the tipping point for a digital change right now than I think we have been ever. Because why not, right? So I think a lot of the people who have maybe historically blocked out technology as sort of the enemy to consistency and to predictability in terms of service, I think the more that community learns about the benefits of even just the data sharing, right? Not using it for the execution of their transportation and their model, but what I talked about in the last slide, just even using it for their own data purposes to learn the industry and learn the market data, that really, I think, is the benefit that a lot of those individuals in the no current plans to change category, I think that's how they're going to limp into that and really understand, okay, there are benefits to API that go beyond just finding a transactional truck that I don't know who it is and I can't control who it is. I think that the image of what API is and sort of what the benefits are, I think will change dramatically as more people learn about it. And again, go beyond just the concept of workflow automation and access to transactional trucks rather. I think that's where the learning curve will start to move in the favor of tech adoption. And I think, again, you'll find a lot more people in that mix of digital and traditional category, because we believe that really is the sweet spot. We have no plans to go full digitization except for just the workflow automation that we are trying to hone in on ourselves internally. But again, we're not trying to lose that relationship and that human touch to the process, in front of what's going on behind the curtain.
Yeah, technology just enhances those relationships. It really does. So if we go to long-term strategies, right? Question 11 here, long-term strategies. Please rank the following as most important factors when making decision on supply chain partners. High service levels and on-time deliveries, number 1. No real surprise. Low cost being number 2. No real surprise. I think one of the third most common or most important factors in the survey is one that I think is often overlooked. Scalability and dedicated options. Scalability is very valuable, especially if you're in a growth environment. But high service levels, certainly, performance is always top of the list, along with costs, right?
Yeah, these really all kind of work together, right? If you were sort of ordering them. So yes, the scalability and dedicated options, number 3 in terms of what's most important. But really, the way we look at that is, the deeper the carrier relationships, the more access to scalable, dedicated capacity options that we can provide, that will lead to lower costs. That will lead to higher service levels all at the same time, right? So I don't think these have to be as individual as this graph might suggest moving forward, right? So I know that they're individual on their own, but I do believe those 3 specifically work hand in hand. And I think of course, it's not surprising to see high service levels and on-time deliveries, number 1, especially coming out of what's been a very, hard year for service and hard couple of years for service. And I know that's the source of a lot of pain in the conversations that our shippers are having with their customers, right? And sort of what the solutions are to make sure that the historical on-time expectations get back to, pre-pandemic levels, right? And sort of pre-chaos levels. But again, how do we keep that service level, mantra without losing, any of the service and the human touch to digitization? And that's what we talked about in the last slide, right? How can we reduce costs and optimize the workflows without jeopardizing the service levels at all. And that is the conversation, I think, with a lot of the shippers that we are partnered with. Is that's what we're going for. That's what we're attempting. That is what we are succeeding on right now in this case, and that case. This is what we want you to take back to the conversations with your leadership and your executive teams. Is this is the answer, right, to the volatility, but here's what we're not sacrificing. Here's what we're still focused on, just from a relationship standpoint, which is we're not going to put, you guys, our partners, our relationships that we've had for years at risk by, jeopardizing that service level just for the sake of saying that we are a digital freight brokerage. That's not the answer. That's not what we're going for. And I think that I think is the conversation that's resonating. That's the feedback that we're getting is, okay, we are very interested in all of the things you're doing over here. But how do you do that without sacrificing this? And does that actually get us to dedicated options, or does that just get us more transactional coverage? And I think the ones that are doing it correctly, we're really trying to focus on using digital tools to just get, again, access and quick access to the best dedicated capacity partners. It's not about accessing commoditized data and commoditized capacity. It's about accessing the right carrier model and procurement model under the hood. And that's what still takes the human touch and sort of the experience and operational experience within this industry of how to develop that procurement network and that capacity network that is still very valuable and not commoditized, right? So how do you develop that private capacity network and then just create the API connectivity to that?
And that's a very strategic kind of outlook, right? I mean, a long term, it'll take you through this cycle and it'll help out with the next cycle, because I'm sure it will be a quite, maybe not as volatile as this one, but it'll seem like there's a lot of volatility as we go through the next cycle, and it's always best to be prepared for those.
Yeah, as much as we can be. And again, this is part about, what we talked about before a few slides ago is what can you take control of, right? What can you control that's not necessarily, a market impact? And again, there is no downside to just giving yourselves access to that data to see how you can use it, right? That is something you can control. That is something that you can take as part of a conversation, a strategic conversation to a leadership team and say, this is what we are doing. This is how we're doing it differently. This is what we are controlling. We are trying to get out in front of a capacity shortage issue that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years by doing this, right? And I think that's the confidence in the conversation, which is we are partnering with somebody who is trying to access that data and that capacity just a little differently.
Yep, exactly right. As we come here to the long-term trend slide, we're coming to the end of the survey. So if any of our audience members have any questions out there that they'd like to ask Adam or myself, please throw those into the question segment here on your screen, and we'll get those answered here after this. But we're looking at long-term strategies, now long-term trends. What do shippers have their eyes on, and what are they expecting over the next 5 years, right? So transparency and visibility, technology improvements. So that includes tracking and tracing, inventory management, forecasting, warehouse management. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, what I think is the biggest trend over the last 3 to 5 years, and what's really picking up steam is this sharing of data, of aggregating and getting, I guess, to metadata, where we're all understanding the market much, much better than what we were 5-10 years ago. Sustainability within the supply chain, increased changes in government regulation, no surprise on that, and vehicle technology improvements, and that includes autonomous trucking and electric vehicle use, and I think that is coming down the pipe. It's barreling down the pipe, really. Right now, or barreling down the highway, you see some major leaps in vehicle technology improvements that I think will make transportation, especially ground transportation, much more efficient over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it seems, I mean, tell me if you disagree, but it seems like that's happening a little less out of the news too, right? It came out as a pretty hot topic even just a few years ago. It was all over the place. I feel like you're right, that the improvements that are being made are all over the place, right? And what that means in terms of the government regulations and sort of how that truly goes large scale, I think is still yet to be seen. But I had an interesting conversation with a shipper yesterday who, again, was pretty far along in their development of that initiative. But you just don't hear about it as much, I don't think, in the news, at least compared to what I was used to a couple of years ago. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how that moves forward and what are the regulations that sort of go hand in hand with that expansion. But you're right, the transparency and visibility, that can apply to tracking and tracing, inventory management, anything. I think just the concept of being better partners and sharing access to whatever it is, that the shipping community needs. That's what we're here to try to do, right? So if it's visibility to track and trace, great, we have that, right? Most people do. I feel like it's table stakes. I think the visibility into, again, that consistent dedicated capacity network and transparency of rates and transparency of market data is really, no surprise to see that as the market level trends that everyone's going to be watching, because that really does play into what is the next phase of this industry and how supply chain will digitize and how all of us will benefit from those tools.
And it's kind of brought to us all by the rise of APIs and the adoption of APIs. I think it's not exotic anymore. It's table stakes, right? APIs, they'll still give you a competitive advantage depending on the data, but just adopting APIs and pumping in data is more of table stakes now than a true forward-thinking or early adopter competitive advantage, something that gives you a leg up. You have to adopt. You have to adopt ingesting data through APIs to create an outlook of the market that will give you predictable capacity, predictable rates, predictable RFP processes, shortening down the cycle of that RFP process. I think that's a huge trend as well, right? Is that the technology to do RFPs, back in the old days, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when everything was on spreadsheets, you had an annual bid because it took so long to actually do a bid. Where I think the technology exists right now to where you get more to dynamic, what we call dynamic pricing, right? But certainly shorter term.
Real-time dynamic pricing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Adam.
No, I was just saying, real-time and dynamic pricing. And we've seen, even from our largest partners, shortened cycles like that, right? But to your point earlier, it's the API connectivity. I wouldn't say it's table stakes yet, right? It's certainly, I'd still say it's cutting edge in terms of there's probably a small group who are doing it, right? And certainly a smaller group of who are doing it really well. But you're right, the next phase of that, the most important part of that, once everybody has that connectivity and everyone's sharing it, the question is, how good is your data, right? So we can share as much data as you can ingest, but if it does nothing for your network and you don't trust that data, then it just becomes a connectivity tool that's just there, right? So I think right now, getting that action of just TMS to TMS talking together, that's step one. But the larger providers, larger brokers, larger 3PLs out there that have these years and years of data stacked up and have the ability to ingest even more market data into that ecosystem, how valuable is that depends on how good are your rates and how quick and reliable is your capacity, right? So I think shippers are finding out very quickly who's just a connection and who is really a connection into usable and very actionable, data and execution for themselves.
Yeah, exactly right. It's been this tsunami of data that has flooded really every market, but certainly transportation. And one of the challenges is finding out what data sets or what you can do with the data, right? What's useful and what's just noise. And because there's so much information flowing right now, it's hard to tell. And that's where you can really, you can get another competitive advantage right there if you're able to identify what's working and what's not.
Yeah, and that's the challenge right now. So right now, I think everyone's on board with connectivity is good, right? In concept, we want access to it so we can filter it out and figure out if there is something useful for us in this trove of data. And that's the phase we're in right now, right? And some companies' data is much better than others, and I think that's what shippers are finding out. So again, I think especially the large shippers, they have the teams to go through that data analysis and make sure that whatever they're putting through the tool, they're getting the responses and they're using it intelligently. And they're turning that into action in terms of decision making of who their next phase of partners will be, right? But I think that's where we're in right now in terms of the race to making sure we are providing the best data that you have automatic access to.
Exactly right. It's about partnerships, data, everything, all the technology, all the innovation. It should enhance your relationships, right? With customers, with your carriers, with other vendors, all through the supply chain. If it doesn't enhance those relationships, then it's tough to really advocate for it. So, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, no questions from the audience, so we'll give you guys a few minutes back in your day. We hope you found today's presentation to be insightful as you plan for the coming months. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen in. Thank you also to our friends at Redwood for partnering with us on today's webinar. And of course, to Kevin and Adam for being here today to share your insights and walk through these findings with us. We will be releasing the full white paper based on this study in the coming weeks, so you can stay tuned for the notification for that when it becomes available. Thank you so much again for joining, and we hope to see you here for another webinar very soon.